Welcome back. We are joined again by Ray McGovern, a CIA analyst for 27 years who chaired the national intelligence estimates and prepared the CIA's daily briefs for the president. So, yeah, thank you for coming back on.
You're most welcome, Glenn. Glad to be with you.
So, well, you and I, we did some communication back and forth, and also have talked to other people on this topic as well, which is the pressure that President Putin is currently under. Again, I'm not sure from where, the public, the military, security services, essentially a lot of pressure to retaliate more forcefully, not just against Ukraine, but also possibly against its Western backers who appear to have, well, crossed that line between a proxy war and a direct war. I was wondering how you are assessing the information or the situation. What is what are the dilemmas now for Putin, and yeah, which way do you think it's going to go? Because, well, I guess in some regards we already seen the attacks on Ukraine becoming much more fierce, but will Ukraine be the only one who essentially yeah, pays the punishment, will pays the price for these attacks on Russia, or will Russia go after the Western backers as well?
That is the question, Glenn. I'm glad you set it up that way. This all depends on my concept of what a cautious person Vladimir Putin is. I don't see that he would take extraordinary risks, even if there's only a small chance that NATO would make good on that Article 5 protection, whereby if one state is hit by Russia or anybody else, the others are pledged to come to their aid. The way I look at it is this. The Russian advance in Ukraine has been slowed down. That's undeniable. If you look at the map and you look at the history of the last year, I infer that the slowdown is temporary. It's due to something called drones, okay? Now, drones have been very effective against troop concentrations and everything else, and the Ukrainians have lots of them. So this came to the fore at a little noticed meeting. Perhaps you did because you follow these things closely. But I think it was on Russia Day. Putin arrayed about 20 non-commissioned officers, people who are in the infantry or the assault forces. You know, it reminded me when I was an infantry officer, everyone bragged, "Look, it's the infantry that wins the war." You know, these guys that fly in these airplanes and tank. No, it's the infantry that wins the war. Well, that was all infantry around them, okay? And what was remarkable about that? Well, it was Putin and Belousov, the defense minister, and then all these sergeants and privates, and just and some of them were pretty middle-aged, okay? And Putin said, "Okay, now, thanks for coming here. I thought this is the way I'd like to celebrate this special day. Now, tell me what you need. Tell me how it's going on the front." Did you see this, Glenn? I'm just wondering. Have
No,
you? Oh, okay.
I missed that one.
It was very little noticed. Anyhow, these sergeants, you know, they're ramrod straight, and no one would volunteer to be the first. So Belousov, said, "Why don't you?" So then they got going, and the first one said, "You know, Starlink is a real problem. I mean, these damn drones, they're hitting us, and they're guided by this Starlink and stuff, and we don't have anything like it." And Putin says, "Well, the good news is we do have something like it, but we don't have it. We don't have it employed yet at the front, but it's coming. And please, just be patient. We're working on this. We know it's Starlink, but we have. Please." Next one says, "You know, they have night vision goggles, and they have a lot of other special stuff that we don't have." So Putin turns to Belousov. He says, "Hey, what is this?" And Belousov says, "Look, they're on their way. we know about this. We're developing it. And then Putin says to this group of non-commissioned officers, look, this is the guy I made Secretary of Defense or Defense Minister because he knows all this stuff. He's worked in the military industries, and if anybody can get this done, he can get it done, and he's going to get it done, okay? So anyhow, it was so frank, and as they eased up, so what's my take here? My take is that drones are a real problem. They have slowed down the Russian offense, but the inexorable movement towards Kramatorsk and the others, I guess, what's it? Konstantinovka is right now being occupied by the Russians. It's just a matter of time before the Russians develop those kinds of countermeasures that Putin referred to, and Belarus as well, and they make their they attrit. I'm not talking weeks. I'm probably talking months, but I am talking this year. Okay, so with that as the backdrop, in other words, Russia continuing to have the upper hand, no matter how many drones the West throws at Russia. How does Putin look at the general situation where these embarrassing drones come into St. Petersburg and other places, even while he's having the economic summit? Well, they hit nowhere near the economic summit. They were embarrassing, but you had to look way in the horizon to see what they were. And this most recent wave of drones that were a raid against Moscow, they turned out to be full of kerosene. They turned out have you seen this? It's really interesting. I was watching this one night. I was on live with some other interviewer, and it looked terrible what was going into Moscow. And then we learned the next day that, these drones were specifically designed to have kerosene. So when they dropped them, when they were shot down, whoof, you got a real effect such as Hollywood needs, right? So the other side of it is that there is pressure on Putin to wind this damn thing up. The Russian successor to the KGB and its foreign outreach, the SRV, they put out a PR, a statement from their public relations department. I didn't know they had one, but it said, look, we want to call your attention to the fact that the Latvians have been persuaded by the Ukrainians that they can make 5 airfields available to the Ukrainians to come in and fire their drones and their missiles from, okay? And they assured the Latvians that they could do this and no one would ever know where they came from. So the SRE says, this is a combination of Russophobia and naivete. I mean, we know exactly where these 5, we know how. You want the coordinates? We have we also have the coordinates of Riga and other decision-making centers. So, bottom line, membership in NATO will not protect you from appropriate retaliation for use of territorial space against Russia. Whoa, a very specific warning. Now, I have not noticed any drones or missiles being fired from Latvia, although some come from that general direction, the Baltic area. And I dare say I'll be surprised if the Latvians make those airfields available to the Russians, because then it will be a question of, well, what do the Russians do? Do they automatically strike Riga? Or they strike any one of those launch pads? Not automatically. This is high stakes stuff. And the way I perceive Putin, consummate politician and gradualist, is he's got his people arrayed around his desk here, and he says, okay, now, you guys want me to strike Riga, or somebody say just those launch pads that the Ukrainians are using or threaten to use. So Okay, now is Latvia a NATO country? Yeah, well, yes, it is. Well, is there a NATO treaty that would compel the other members to come to its defense and make war against us? Oh, yeah, but it doesn't mean anything. Okay, Putin doesn't mean anything. Oh, you mean because NATO's fallen apart? Yeah, because NATO. Well, what are the chances that Donald Trump might invoke Article 5 if we hit Riga or if we hit one of those bases and 10%. What do you say? 15%, 20%. Too high. Much too high. You you want me to risk everything we've achieved since 2000? Everything we've achieved in Russia? By depending on an unpredictable president not to invoke Article 5 when we don't need that kind of thing? Forget about it. We're gonna completely just kind of a trit. If the Latvians do if the Ukrainians do fire missiles or drones from Latvia, we'll deal with that. It won't be automatic. That SRV thing was a warning, okay? And we can retaliate, and maybe we will, but not just now. We're winning. For God's sake, we have a little patience. Now, on the political side, there's also some heat that you can see. Finally, over the last couple of months, we've learned what the agreements were reached, the Anchorage agreements, okay? And they have to do with Trump giving up the idea of an immediate ceasefire and Trump promising to use his influence with Zelensky and the Europeans, should kind of knock it off and kind of come to an agreement, a sensible negotiated settlement here, maybe giving some flexibility on their territorial demands and so forth. Okay, and for Putin, well, that was enough to say, okay, we will make concessions as well. I mean, the Russians use that word concessions. Now, they don't spell them out. I have some guesses, but that doesn't really matter. Okay, so that was the deal. Now, what happened? Well, clearly, I was misled 3 days after Anchorage when Trump, in his royalty, convened I call them the seven dwarfs from Europe there, and read them in the Riot Act. In the middle of it, he said, oh, pardon me, I promised to call Vladimir just now, Vladimir Putin. So could you guys just have some coffee or something for a while and leave the room? And I'll call you. I'll let you know I'll tell my people to let you know when you come back. I mean, that's the tone of the thing, I thought. And I thought Zelensky had been read the Riot Act and the Europeans got the message. And I'm kind of not so embarrassed that I didn't predict this because neither did the Russians. They thought that Trump not only would be able and willing, but the Europeans would be bent into shape and said, look, this is a lost thing. Let's cut the best deal we can. But the Europeans didn't do that. The Europeans, for whatever reason, decided they would encourage Zelensky, give him $90 billion more, and they just keep going, okay? So from the political aspect, now Lavrov, Ushakov, all the main people are saying, look, this was the deal. It came at the Americans' initiative, okay? And they haven't been able to, or they haven't been willing to bring the Europeans and the Ukrainians into shape. And so there's only one side, as Ushakov said this 2 days ago, there's only one side adhering to the Anchorage Agreement. And so what we'll do is we'll just go for victory. And that's inevitable. It's coming. Just kind of be patient, will you? We have these people reneged. Forgive us for being a little naive because every now and then it does appear that Trump has some influence over this guy, Zelensky. After all, when he was threatening to throw drones at St. Petersburg during our or when he was threatening to ruin the May Day parade, we couldn't get him to stop until we called my friend Donald Trump. And in that case, he came through. He persuaded Zelensky, as was admitted by Zelensky, to have a 4-day pause and so the parade went ahead. So that's how it gets kind of fuzzy. The U.S. has certain leverage on Zelensky to do some things. It doesn't have enough leverage, or it's unwilling to use it to do what Trump promised in Anchorage. And there was one other point here that I wanted to make, and it'll probably come to my mind a little bit later, but I've been talking too long as it is, Glenn, so feel free to stop me when I become too Irish and too extroverted.
No, well, I think that probably the Russians they got less faith in Trump's diplomacy after Iran, because there as well you saw the first initiative for the ceasefire, which was on the U.S. side when they accepted the 10-point plan of the Iranians, but then walked it back right away. And overall, the trust in his diplomacy has diminished. But about the risks, though, I mean, you mentioned the 10-15% chance of ending up in a direct war with NATO, and that is a big risk. But if the alternative was status quo, I would see it. The problem, though, is status quo is not available. The escalations only continue. And, well, essentially my thought, though, when I watched this massive attack on Moscow was that someone would have to pay a very big price for this, but that someone will likely be Ukraine. And it does seem a bit unfair because the Ukrainians, well, a majority of Ukrainians, they did not want the regime change that NATO instigated in 2014. And most Ukrainians voted for peace platform in 2019, and they had the NATO countries essentially reverse it. And most Ukrainians want immediate negotiations. The Europeans are boycotting diplomacy. So most of the Ukrainians also want Zelensky gone. It's NATO that's pumping billions of dollars to fund the corruption to keep Zelensky and his henchmen in power. And it's NATO that's offering or providing all the weapons and intelligence and working on these attacks on Russia. So it does seem unfair that it's that it's Ukrainian cities that will burn as a result of this. I know politics shouldn't be about what is fair. I mean, what is strategically sound, but nonetheless, it does sound cruel that the Ukrainians always have to pay the price for what the NATO countries are doing. Do you see, though, the escalation? Like when does it essentially become too risky for Russia not to essentially ignore those 15%?
Well, we're human beings, and we should look askance at the kind of cruelty that is being visited on the Ukrainians, that's for sure. But the Ukrainian rulers, Zelensky,
Yeah.
look what he's done in exhuming the bodies of Nazis and giving them full honors. You know, whether he's been bought into this Nazi sort of attitude toward things, or whether he feels constrained by the only viable divisions in the Ukrainian armies that are left, the Nazi-led divisions, I don't know, but he does seem beholden to these people, and so the Ukrainian people don't really have a chance here. See, what else, Glenn? You had a more interesting question that I didn't really ask.
No, just
answer.
when does Russia essentially reach the conclusion that doing nothing is more risky than retaliating against NATO? Because the collapse, I would say, of its deterrent is seen now in Moscow as being a key problem. Otherwise, I'd just like to add, I agree with you. I think, yes, Zelensky, what he's doing, the reason why the Poles are so angry with him, he's become quite a horrible character. But that's not how he was elected, though. So I think that, well, if it was up to the Ukrainians, he would be gone. But, in the NATO countries who are paying very big bills to make sure that he stays exactly where he is, that he continues to kidnap his own citizens and ship them to the front. So I don't
Yeah.
think, yeah, but essentially, well, back to my question.
Yeah, no, I remember the question now. Now, I don't know if you knew this, but there is an analysis now that those, as we watched all those drones going into Moscow and the whole area. Well, it wasn't the whole area of Moscow. It was on the outskirts, okay, where nothing much was happening, and they were full of kerosene. In other words, they weren't really bona fide drones, as that's the way to put it, okay? And the reason they were set that way is so that the Ukrainians and others could take photos, and people like me had to watch that live, talking to another interviewer. Saying, oh my God, what's going on here? The next day, we found out what these things really were. So a lot of this is showmanship, a lot of this is Hollywood. But your point is quite valid. Uh, Most people phrase it the way you did. How much can Putin withstand in all this? Well, my notion really uh, derives from my appreciation of Putin as well, he's atypical of all the Soviet and Russian leaders that have watched over 6 decades now. Okay, he's unique. He's not going to be provoked. Okay, when he has the upper hand, he recognizes it. He's willing and not bashful about letting these sergeants complain about these drones that Ukraine and the West are using and hurting their advance. Yeah, he holds that open, and it's videographed and so forth. In other words, I see a confidence in Putin that believes that the notion that he feels he has to trim his sails to to those who say, "Aren't you tired? We got to go faster." The other thing is that, as you know, because you've been in Russia probably more recently than I, life goes on there. I mean, life hardly recognizes the special military operation. And that, of course, was the deliberate objective of Putin, not to get a big war going with conscription and all that kind of stuff. So the last thing I'll say on that is there is retaliation. There is escalation. The Russians have fired so many missiles and drones at Ukraine that they can whittle down what's left of Ukraine's ability to assemble some of these drones and so forth. So it's, in my view, Putin does not have a real hard time in saying, "Look, we've come we've come this way um, pretty far. Uh, we were disappointed by what Trump thought he could promise. We know that sometimes he can come through, but he didn't come through on this big one. He wasn't able to restrain the Europeans, and that's a constant theme now. He was unable or unwilling, but mostly unable to restrain the Europeans. Are the Europeans a threat? For God's sake, no. Starmer's gone now. Merz is in line for going. Macron will be gone next year. Just be patient. We got it. We got it made in Ukraine. There's no need for us to do anything drastic. And if we find out that the Latvians have been persuaded to actually let the Ukrainians use their bases, we'll deal with that. Okay, we've already threatened them. We don't think they're going to do that, but if they do, well, we'll deal with that. And we got lots of other ways. After all, it was the SRV that warned about this. It wasn't Lavrov or Ushakov. So there are plenty of ways to deal with the Latvians without the risking, even if it's only a 10% risk, getting into a war under Article 5 of the NATO Charter. So I may be wrong. I'm sort of an outlier on this. Most people see a lot of pressure on Putin. Sure, there's Karaganov, and you've interviewed Karaganov. I'm not impressed by Karaganov. I thought Mearsheimer pretty much asked him all the right questions. It pretty much did him in by exposing the loopholes or the lacunae in his arguments. So I think that Medvedev and Karaganov are useful. They're the bad cops. They remind people from time to time that there is this change in the nuclear doctrine, that came about as, wow, what was it, about 2 years ago that some Ukrainian drones hit a strategic bomber site well inside Russia? My God. I remember everybody at that time saying, "Oh my God, that's it. That's the triad. That triggers the new Russian nuclear policy." Oh my God, what happened? Nothing. And then they drone the president's residence in Valdai. And what happens then? Oh my God. Well, nothing except they get a piece of the drone and they ceremoniously give it to the U.S. military attaché in Moscow and say, "Take a look at this, okay? This is what you said. Take a look, see about this the guidance system and where it comes from and so forth." And they did. What came of that? I don't know. I don't think the U.S. ever responded. But Russia didn't make a big deal of it either. So there are people, and again, they may be proven right, that say, "Oh my God, when they went after the uh, Putin's residence near Valdai, they thought he was there. As a matter of fact, they told him to hold the phone while they got the missiles ready." I don't know about that, but even if they did, the calm reaction under these provocations, and let's face it, they are provocations, persuade me that this is Cool Hand Luke. This is a guy who's not going to be provoked. He's got a winning hand. The U.S. has discredited itself in Iran and elsewhere, running out of missiles and stuff. And the Ukrainians, sure, they get $90 billion worth of weapons. Where are they going to get them from? Well, the U.S. has not got a lot of them that they need, and and the Europeans are going to have to pay for them. And so, where's that $90 million going to go? 90 billion, sorry. Well, probably a lot of it go right into the pockets of the notoriously corrupt Ukrainians. So, uh, it, chalk me up to being more relaxed than the others. It depends on one's view of Putin, what kinds of pressures he's under. And I may be completely wrong, but I think he's pretty much in charge. And Lavrov and Ushakov are able to say these things. And but Belorusov, the defense minister, is able to say, "Yeah, those drones are a real problem, but we're working on it. We're going to have our own Starlink. Just be patient." I maybe it's partly a hope, but I think that we could expect a cautious and perspicacious Putin. And I'll just say that he stands out in those qualities among all Soviet and Russian leaders that I have observed. I don't go back to Ivan the Terrible, but I know a lot about what happened after Stalin.
Well, listen, let me just ask one last question. We almost touched on it earlier on, which is the issue of the problems now between Poland and Ukraine. I mean, Poland on one hand has been one of the key sponsors in this war. They're not just the key logistics centers, but they also sent a lot of their own troops as volunteers. And again, they've been cheering this war on since the beginning. But at the same time, of course, the Poles are quite critical about having Ukraine in the European Union, for example, because of some agricultural disputes and a lot of issues. However, we haven't seen anything like this before. That is in Europe, at least, as well as the US. Since 2014, we have to pretend as if the regime change, had nothing to do with any fascist elements. But now with Zelensky essentially rebearing, fascists from World War II, giving them for the full honor of the government, it has also created some annoyance among the Poles, because they slaughtered 100,000 Polish civilians as well, and this seems to be really derailing the relationship. Zelensky and his crew they refuse to walk this back, and for Poland this is too much to accept. So how do you see the significance of this?
Well, the way I look at it is the Poles acted out of conviction and out of some historical memory. 100,000 Poles met their death at the hands of these guys, these Nazis. And to have them exhumed and buried with high honors, there's an affront that needed some kind of reaction. Now, why? Why Zelensky would feel that that's a good thing to do? Well, that's, I think, the real question. And the question, I think the answer is that he's either thrown his complete lot in with the Nazis, they're the neo-Nazis, if you will, uh, or he feels like he's under their wing, or he's not free from them. In other words, they are his last resort, and he's got to depend on them. He's got to mollify them by gratuitous things like this. So another question that I had would be, well, now most of that military aid comes through Poland, right? Why is it that the Russians haven't bombed those those railroad tunnels and all the places where the Poles send that? Well, I think that's coming. That's coming. That's Ukraine. They can do that. And it's just kind of illustrates that Zelensky is either lost it, picking a fight with the Belarusians now as well, or he's just trying to show that he's a tough guy and that these guys, the Azov types, or the descendants of these Nazis that did that work during World War II, that's where he's got to curry favor. And the weakness of the what I call the three blind mice. Well, now Stammer's going out, but you have Merz and you have Macron. I mean, the three blind mice get all the attention, right? Because they meet every other Thursday for a men's group, and sometimes they have Giorgia Meloni come around, and but the Poles don't count. The Poles are never in the pictures. What if I were a Pole? Let's say, we're a pole apart, I guess, so to speak. So, the Poles have a certain, Poles I know have a lot of, a lot of dignity, so to speak. So, yeah, I think it's a kerfuffle, but I think the main lesson to be taken from it is that Zelensky feels he has to do these things to curry favor, stay in the good graces of these Nazis that the Russians have to remove and have pledged to remove. And that's going to take a while. But my notion is that once the battle on the battlefield is won, and the Russians can deal with the Azov battalions or regiments or divisions or whatever they got now, then without any real military support, the Nazis are going to go flee to Argentina again, and there may be a prospect for some calming down there in Ukraine. That's my best guess, but in answer to your question, that's how I interpret it, Glenn.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. It's a difficult one to explain across Europe because we've been spoon-fed that there were no fascists. This is Russian propaganda until the Poles had to push back. But no, yeah, it doesn't seem that it's gonna put a dent in Europe's enthusiasm for the war, though. Although Poland, of course, is a bit more shaky as a result of this. Anyways, I've taken an hour out of your day, so thank you very much for the time.
Well, thank you for indulging me in my poem and other recollections of my experiences there. So